Well, hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne. Thank you for finding my channel. Thank you for finding me. If you're interested, I grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne, Australia, without the help of greenhouses or grow lights or humidifiers, really just me and them outside or inside or not at all. So if that sounds like your bag, do hit subscribe. I post every week. I am a complete amateur. But luckily, not everyone is. Yes, plant lovers, today we are going to visit a great grower. Now, he's not a commercial grower, but he is really a specialist across many types of orchids, from cooler to quite tropical. He has an array of shade houses with an array of temperatures, so he can grow just about anything. And he is the president of the Orchid Society's Council of Victoria. So I would safely say whatever he doesn't know about orchids kind of ain't worth knowing. And today I was very fortunate to go and spend some time with Michael to talk about deflasking. Now, Exhibit A. I have made a deflasking video, which I will link. That was quite a few years ago, and what I was deflasking was this. Now, at the time, this was called Doritis pulcherrima. You probably can't read that label. Anyway, there was a flask, and I deflasked it, and there was many plants in that flask. Plant lovers, these are the two that are left. It was probably getting on for 3 years ago, actually. And fairly early in my orchid growing days, and I had tried a flask before, I think of Lycaste, and tremendous failure. Although a few did hang on and then ultimately died. This is the sole result of my last deflasking. So I thought, you know what? Let's go and talk to someone who deflasks all the time and find out the hows, the whys, the wherefores, and the where nots of flasking. So without further ado, let's go over to Michael's shade house and find out how he goes about deflasking. So here we are with Michael, who is the president of the Orchid Society's Council of Victoria.
Absolutely.
It can't get any further up the food chain, I think, in terms of specialist knowledge, Michael.
Well, thank you very much.
Now, Michael has very kindly agreed to talk about three things. There's going to be 3 videos. This will be the first one. And the first thing we thought would be a really great thing to talk about was deflasking, for many reasons, largely because I think many of us fail abjectly.
That's not uncommon. But there are a few sort of fundamental tips. Once you get them right, deflasking is actually relatively easy and a really exciting thing to do. I think.
Okay.
I would have deflasked possibly 2,000 flasks over the past 15 years.
Guess how many I've deflasked? 2.
Well, you're well on the way.
100% failure and maybe 4% success, because I think I've got 4. But we'll get to that.
We shall.
Let's start at the very beginning. Let's show everyone what a flask looks like. Although it's not standard, is it? They can look in any vessel with a lid, basically.
Yes. And increasingly nowadays they come in what's called the whiskey bottle style, which are the flat ones, either glass or plastic.
And just explain, I guess, for the viewer who might not know, why are orchids germinated in such a vessel as that?
Well, a number of reasons for that is orchids are propagated. If you're not dividing a plant up, you propagate them either by seed or by cloning. And one of the problems with orchid seeds is they don't have the outside coating of I think it's called the endosperm, which provides nutrients for young seeds like peas and beans. That's basically nutrient for the actual growing part. Orchids don't have that. And they really need to be grown from seed, starting in a laboratory in one of these containers where the nutrients are in the agar at the bottom, so that the seeds actually have something to feed from. So that's the case with growing orchids from seed, and also when you're cloning them and cutting up the little protocorms and multiplying plants up that way, they also need to be grown in a laboratory. It's a difficult process.
Yes, so we're certainly not going to go there, but I am a fan of mycorrhizal fungi, and if we're looking at orchids in the wild, then that process is facilitated by mycorrhizal fungi, who give the seed its protein to be able to grow. Fascinating process. All right, so we've decided to get a flask. Now, here we are in Australia. Is it fair to say that really the only way to get something that's unusual or not already in the country is by flasks?
Yes, certainly on a practical level. You can import plants, but that's a really difficult process. Flasks are certainly the easiest way. And the easiest way to get flasks into the country is to bring them in yourself. Accompanied baggage, there are rules that the Department of Agriculture have as to how many flasks you can bring in and the documentation that you need. But accompanied baggage is really easily, because you can bring in nowadays as many as you like. They do need to be inspected, and you do need to have them all labelled properly, but it's a really effective way, and lots of people do that. There are also a number of hobby growers who import them, and if you know who they are, then you can sort of hijack their import.
Such as yourself.
Such as nice, absolutely. And then they put out a flask list, and then you say, okay, I'd like this one, this one, this one. They deal with all the paperwork, they deal with the inspections, and then once they arrive, assuming they clear the inspection, they then send them down to you. And as you say, a great way of getting new and different varieties.
And there is a company that I know of, and I'll put the link below, but one of the great ways to do that is by joining an orchid club, is it not?
Absolutely.
One of the many that you are either the president of or supreme commander of.
Involved in.
Yes. All right, so you've decided that's the way to go. You've decided to go for a flask. Now, in the level of kind of competency, and I started too soon, where should you be in terms of your orchid growing career to have a go at a flask?
I'd recommend that you need to understand the fundamentals of the plant you've actually bought. What conditions does it like?
Yep.
Do you have those conditions at home? For instance, if you live in, say, Tasmania, then you wouldn't get a Phalaenopsis or something that really needs a fair degree of heat. Think about the conditions you've got and then work out what plants are appropriate for you in a flask.
Good point. So I was going to say that I had heard on the ether that Phalaenopsis were actually a good starter plant for the deflasker who might be beginning, but you think not?
Look, again, it depends on the climatic conditions you've got, because in colder temperatures, Phalaenopsis will be very unhappy. Of course, a lot of people grow them inside the house, which is one of the great things about Phales. You really can grow them anywhere, but not necessarily. I haven't had a huge amount of success with Phalaenopsis.
Really?
No, I find other things grow much better for me.
Oh, you fail, Michael.
Clearly, yes. As looking over your shoulder, we'll perhaps show the viewers that tray at some stage. Yes, that
right.
one.
Right, this one. Now, okay, so Phalaenopsis, how do you pronounce that?
Pulcherima.
Pulcherima. Now, this used to be
Doritis.
Doritis. Here is a weird coincidence, Michael. That is the second plant that I deflasked, this very thing. And weirdly, I had a massive failure rate, but I've still got, I think, 3 plants.
That's good. That's 3 more than I've got.
Wow, okay. Why do you know why yours would have failed?
I'm not entirely sure. I think with those, it may have been I took them out too early. And that would have been almost the end of winter last year. And getting your timing right for taking plants out of flask is important.
So you don't
I think I got the timing wrong.
So you don't mean the size of the plant, actually the season was too soon, too cool?
Potentially so. When it comes to deciding when you take the plant out of the flask, there are a number of factors you need to look at. Firstly, the size of the plant. If they're really filling the flask up, time to take them out. Also, when, as I mentioned before, at the time of year it is, when you're getting longer daylight hours, warmer temperatures, generally good.
Right.
The third factor is if there's mold or contaminants developing in there, because the agar that the plants are growing in is really rich in nutrient.
Right.
And if you get contaminants in there, then if you see mold starting to grow, got to get them out because your plants will die.
Now, what about ferns? Because actually, the 2 things that I've deflasked, I've had fern spore, obviously, and ferns have grown.
Ferns in the flask.
Well, I don't know if they were in the flask, but in the deflasked plant, ferns have appeared. Now, would that be after or before? Somehow, yeah, there'd be no way that a spore would be in the flask.
No, because again, these are produced in completely sterile conditions in a laminar flow cabinet.
Yeah.
It would be very surprising if there were ferns in there. And if there were ferns in the cabinet, there would have been other problems in the cabinet and it would have gone mouldy earlier.
There you go. Okay. All right. So we know, well, kind of the process to go to finding a flask, when you should actually deflask the plant, what you should be looking for in terms of the plant, i.e. your conditions, the time of year to do it. I think the only thing remaining, Michael, is to deflask this.
Absolutely.
Shall we go?
We shall.
Okay. All right, Michael, we've moved into the kitchen, the laboratory. What are we going to deflask today?
Right, well, what we've got here is an Australian native Dendrobium hybrid, which hopefully is going to be bright yellow with lots of purple spots on it. So I've got rather high hopes for this one.
What is its species origin? Is it a speciosum?
It's speciosum based.
So we're looking at 10 years to see this flower, Michael.
Hopefully not that long. It's got some other species in it which aren't speciosum. I think there's some tetragonum in there as well, and various other things which will certainly speed up the process that it takes to get to flowering size.
All right.
So, again, first thing you have to do is get these plants out of the bottle. And fortunately, this bottle here has very vertical sides and it's rather easy. There are certain other shapes of flask that you get, be they the conical ones or even the flat glass ones. You actually have to break the bottle really to get them out. But this one won't be that difficult. So if we take that sticky tape off, this will be really easy to get out, which I'm glad is the case. Now what I first do then is put some warm water in there, slush them all around to loosen them, because one of the key things when deflasking is to avoid root damage. The more root damage you do, the longer it will take for the plant to really sort of kick on. So be really careful with the roots. These ones, as you can probably see, are quite long as far as roots go, and that's probably a good thing, but they're more easily damaged if they are long.
Okay.
So put a bit of warm water in there, not too much, and then I just slush it round, and hopefully the plants then do actually start moving.
And I guess they're going to start separating.
They might a little bit in here, although these roots are fairly intertwined. So, and generally you can, I can see that it's separated from the base of the flask there, and I'll try and grab quite a few of them so you're not pulling plants apart too quickly. And you can generally...
It's like a forceps birth.
It is. Pull off old dead leaves and bits as you go, but it's a matter of being as gentle as you can, and that has come out really quite well. So bottle to one side, and then what I do under running water is try and wash off all of the agar, being the growing material. So I like to try and get rid of all of that stuff. Now some people would take this group of plants and put them all just as they are in the one pot and then let them grow and later separate them. I like to separate them all from the very outset. My concern is that if there's any fungal contamination in this lump of plants here, then it may spread, and if they're all together, there's a risk that they'll all get affected by that.
Fair enough.
So I always have every plant separated, and that has always worked very well for me. So I'll keep rinsing these plants. And the running water also helps separate them a little bit.
Yeah.
If they do need a bit of coaxing, I always have a pair of tweezers, and you can generally, either by your fingers, you can almost start separating plants out individually. There we are, that one's come along really well. Separating all of these plants out individually. Sometimes you just have a bit of a pull at various parts of the plants and see what comes away.
It's like untangling electronic cords.
It is indeed. Again, doing whatever you can to avoid damaging roots. And you can generally do this fairly well. If you've got your plants at the right time, then they're coming actually away really quite well.
Yeah.
So there, then there's a big one over here.
So I'm just going to
That's going
hold
to come out.
this one up for everyone to look at. Right, it's actually a very vigorous root system. So how old would this plant be at this point? How long has it been in the flask, do you think?
I would think it's probably been in there for 18 months, maybe 2 years.
Oh,
probably
right.
only 18 months though.
Right, so I guess quite far along in its growth cycle then.
Reasonably, reasonably.
So just looking at this, are you happy with where these roots are at in terms of that plant's capacity to survive?
Yes, very happy. Again, Australian native dendrobiums grown here in Victoria are very easy to grow, and that's a really healthy root system. There is no root damage on any of those, so I've followed my advice and been very careful. And actually you also get to see, with that one there in particular, you get what's called bolters, which are the really big plants in the flask. And they're the ones that ordinarily grow best and flower quickest.
Right, so that's a bolter. So basically it's just bigger.
It's bigger, yes.
It has a zest for life.
It does.
Interesting. So you're going to have a lot of plants from this flask.
Yes, we are. So they're all actually coming away really well. It must say they don't always work this easily, but then you get your little ones like that, so that's certainly not a bolter. And again, I'll separate every single plant out, getting rid of the agar that's there. It doesn't matter if a little bit of agar's left on the root system, that's not a problem.
And I guess, just to confirm, you're getting that off because it's basically a sheath over the root which would prevent it absorbing moisture. Is that the case?
Not so much. It's more because any pathogens that are around will really like the agar because it's nutrient rich and it
right.
may encourage
So it's
whatever problems there are.
like a green light for
Yes,
infection or
yes. Or
evil things in the air.
exactly. It's like, here I am, food, come and get me. And then you might get the plant as well. So with that, of course, we don't
Oh,
want.
I see.
Sometimes you'll get a dead one in amongst everything. That's
Oh,
fine. They're all teased out very nicely. Again, some small ones in there. Here's another bolter.
So, are you going to approach the bolters differently in terms of potting, or will everything get the same?
On the odd occasion, if there's a real size discrepancy, like these two here are really big, I might put them in a larger size pot because these ones will all go into the standard 50mm tube that I use, but these ones here might go into a 65 or even a 75.
Right.
These ones I probably would do that because they're that big. Maybe that one as well. Get that agar off.
Wow, so what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 so far. Wow.
Get them out of the sun.
A lot of lucky friends, perhaps.
Well, yes. Would you like one?
Although, actually, you do have an eBay account, so I will link the name that you sell under on eBay, so anyone in Australia can follow you.
Sure. That would be
Excellent.
great.
So we have now rinsed and separated, as they say.
We have. The next thing that I do with each of these plants is with my tweezers, I'll pull off all old dead leaves because again, this is potential contamination problem because they are dead and therefore will rot down and I don't want that. So I pull all of them off. Sometimes you might even need to scrape a little bit of the leaf down to be able to grab it. But all of those come off.
And all those little sort of early sheaths from the earlier leaves.
If you can.
Yeah.
You don't have to get absolutely every one. But see, there's another one there that I would take off, that little bit there. That's why sometimes it can take up to 45 minutes to do a flask. Pull them off. Then, let's just assume I've done all of that to all of them. What I next then do is arrange them in size because I don't want to put them just sort of willy-nilly. I want to arrange them once they're all individually potted into size order. So now that we've got each plant individually, I'll arrange them in size order from largest to smallest. So
from the
they're
bolters
big.
down.
The bolters are coming with me, so that's probably 1, 2, 3.
I am surprised how big, I've got to pick this up and show people. I am surprised how mature looking this plant is out of the flask. It's quite incredible.
They are, and there's a huge amount of variation ordinarily within a flask.
Yeah.
Again, they're the 6 biggest.
No, I'm just thinking, we were just alluding to that, what is it, not Doritis, how do you pronounce it?
I call it Doritis, but it's Phalaenopsis now.
Doritis, that's Phalaenopsis. I think that the flask that I deflasked, a lot of those plants were still too juvenile and their roots were only a couple of mil, so they kind of didn't stand a chance, I suppose.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, either having no roots or causing root damage are going to be two of the major problems you have in deflasking.
Right.
So these are now looking pretty good and in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's not an even number. Sometimes I'll actually put 2 together because I like having them in rows of 6 again because my tray into which I'm potting them has the 6 compartments. Okay. So then it's potting time.
All right, potting.
Potting, yes indeed. Now I would always pot into these little black plastic pots.
Yeah.
And ordinarily 50mm tubes, really good drainage.
Yeah.
You can probably see down the bottom there.
Yeah, can.
So you get your little pot, your plants are ready, sitting in size order over there. I'll always put a little bit of the bark in the bottom of the pot first, because when you put the plant in, you don't want the roots falling out the holes. You want the roots in the pot.
Okay, let's just stop for a sec, because what is in this tub? What is your potting mix? And do you use the same mix for all deflasked orchids?
Almost invariably, yes. This is a combination of about 6 parts of 6 to 9mm orchiata bark, combined with about 2 parts of these hydroponic clay balls.
Okay.
The reason I use the 2 of those together is that because bark is angular and the balls are round, there will always be air pockets in my mix, and I like there to be air pockets so that the water flows through better and the mix doesn't compact.
Interesting. Okay.
So again, 6 to 9mm bark for de-flask plants. Mature plants, I would ordinarily use some 9 to 12 and perhaps 12 to 18 as well. But for these plants, they've got very small root systems, and I think it's better to have the finer potting medium.
Okay.
So again, a little bit in the bottom to block up all the holes. Then tuck the roots of the plant in, that leaf I missed before, and I'd ordinarily sort of tuck the roots around. Sometimes you can then twist the plant around in a circle so that the roots sort of spiral down in there, because you want all your roots in the mix and facing down. So tuck them all in, and then try and get your plant in the middle of the pot, positioned a bit like that.
Yeah.
Because then whichever direction it wants to grow, it's got space to grow.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll find that the root system forces you to put it over to one side because you don't want to damage the roots. So better than squish it like that, it might need to be to one side. This one's being cooperative and will be happy in the middle. So I grab the pot with some fingers, hold the plant so that the top, where the roots are coming out of the pseudo bulbs there, that needs to be underneath the mix in the case of a dendrobium. But I also like to leave a little gap at the top of the pot so that when I'm watering, it's not bark all the way to the top, because then the water can rush off the outside and also make your mix fall out. So I pot it down a little bit, and again, I do that by hand is really, I think, the only accurate way of doing it. So, and then give the plant a really good shake to make sure that the bark is evenly distributing itself around the plant and between the roots. Again, another good shake, hold the plant in place, shake the pot. That probably needs just a little bit more. That looks about right, I think.
All right. Now let's just bring it and show everyone just the level at which you have got the plant. So just referring to your point there, you can just see some of those roots there, but basically you've covered that point where the roots are starting to come out of the pseudobulb so that it's not exposed. There we go. And then a couple of mil to allow water not to run off.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent.
And I found that probably the next most important thing to do is, once you've planted all of these into their individual pots, water them and don't let them dry out. Some people say leave them out in the open air for a couple of hours to let them harden off.
Oh, once you de-flask them like these here?
Yeah, I would never do that. I think these plants are very vulnerable at the current stage, and drying out, you may damage the root tips, you may damage the leaves, and I've had more problems letting plants dry out than stay too wet.
Interesting.
And so that's just ordinary water. If there was any contamination in the flask, which with this one there wasn't, and you're worried about fungus that you haven't completely got rid of, you can use a fungicide to treat them in the first couple of waters, just to hopefully deal with any of those sorts of problems. But I used to do that with everything, and now I do it with nothing unless it's really contaminated. Okay. And even then, I haven't found fungicide to make a particular difference. Now, once you've got your plants all individually potted, you've got to put them in the tray. And what I do is I go by size again. The very largest one up there, second largest, third largest, fourth largest.
Really?
That way they seem to disperse themselves better. But the actual positioning is also important, because you don't want plants overlapping each other, because that blocks light and it blocks water potentially.
Okay.
So I put my first one in there, and then the second one, you wouldn't put overhanging that. You'd turn around a bit, so that if you were to look straight down on this tray, there would be nothing shading anything else. Okay. With small plants, generally fairly easy to do. Dendrobiums are a little bit different. I do a lot of deflasking of Paphiopedilums, and Paphiopedilums are linear, and it's really easy just to have lots of diagonal lines. These ones tend to have leaves in many directions, but again, moving them around a little bit just to make sure you've got the positioning right. And then once your tray is full, take it outside, give it a good water. And also the other thing, which I found once, one night I was deflasking, I did about 12 flasks, and I forgot to put labels in them. And then at the end of that, there's some I knew which ones they were, but other ones I had no idea. So make sure you label them.
Okay. Well, thank you for deflasking 101. So here we have our tray, which, as you can see, is dripping because you've watered them, Michael.
Absolutely.
Now, the next question for me would be, when would you start fertilizing these?
My principle is that I feed deflask plants immediately because I feed about twice a week.
Yeah.
And if there's a deflask tray next to a mature plant, they're all going to get fertiliser.
Okay, so you don't have a philosophy around that.
No, no, I know some people think,
Withhold love
oh,
for the first year or anything.
no, no. Well, they get hungry just as much as mature plants or people get. So I give them some food. Also, I use the same strength as I do for mature plants as well.
Okay.
Some people would say a bit more dilute,
Yeah.
but I've never found a problem.
And you only use liquid fertilizer?
Correct.
Right. Okay. So these would be fed immediately. So we've
Later
got
today, in fact.
It's nearly lunchtime. Now here we are. There's that plant that you deflasked and potted. How long are these plants, do you think, going to stay in these pots?
Depends how quickly they grow. Those ones won't be very fast growing plants, but I would expect to need to repot them within 12 to 18 months.
Oh, okay.
And probably up into not 60 mil, this is a 50 mil tube, not to 60, but probably going up to the 75, 76 or thereabouts.
Right. And we joked about flowering, but you just told me you thought maybe 3 to 4 years.
Yes, yes. If I'm
Should we
doing
put that
well,
in writing?
if I'm doing well, then it would be only about 3 years. But having a lot of Dendrobium speciosum in the background of this is going to slow it down.
Fair
So
enough.
look, it may be 5, it may be 6. I may get impatient and just dispose of them if they don't flower in time anyway.
Michael, thank you. I can't think of anything we've missed.
The only other thing I would mention is where you put them in your growing area.
Okay, that's a very good point. We have missed something.
We have indeed. Now, being Australian native dendrobiums, they really love high light. So in a house like this, which has a number of layers of shelves, I would be putting them on the top shelf, so they're getting maximum amount of light.
Yeah.
If you're deflasking something like a Paphia pedalum or a Lycaste or something like that, they need less light, so I'd be having them on a lower shelf.
And that goes back to your point originally about what are you choosing to deflask and what are its ideal conditions. So it's basically going into the conditions it's going to like as a mature plant in terms of its light.
Absolutely.
You're not going to be overprotective of anything.
No, they are inherently more fragile. These plants we saw earlier have a really good root system on them, so they should kick on really quickly.
Yeah.
If there's been a problem with the plant or it's got really small roots or very few of them or you've damaged them, then be a little bit more protective of them. But these ones will be fine,
Tough as nuts.
hopefully.
Michael, thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Thank you for going through Deflasking 101. I've learnt a lot. I feel more confident. I'm going to buy a flask at the next meeting.
Brilliant idea.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So there you are, plant lovers. You know what? I actually feel better about myself now. So Michael had tried to deflask Duritis, which is now a Phalaenopsis. They're called Phalaenopsis pulcherrima. So there you are. And kind of understandably, they're not dissimilar. And I really think the issue with my plants was that they had come out of the flask too soon. They really did not have very developed roots. And one of the great things about this plant is, I don't know if you can see, but in that little leaf joint there is a new root forming. And I honestly have not seen any root growth out of the base of these little plantlets. So that will be very reassuring to see. You know what, if I just get one to hang on, that'll be enough for me. Anyway, really interesting. And also, I mean, not that anyone wants anyone to fail, but it is interesting that someone as experienced as Michael, who does often travel the world in the 7 seas buying flasks of unusual orchids, has his failures too. You know, some things just don't work. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. I certainly did, and I'm going to be emboldened to try something else. Not quite sure what it is, but sometimes at the orchid fairs around Melbourne, there are specialists selling flasks. So I usually just walk past because of this experience. But you know what? Next time, plant lovers, I'm going to linger a little longer and see if there's something there calling my name. Anyway, plant lovers, if you want to find out what I'm doing next week in my own amateur journey to try and figure out how and what to grow, you'll have to subscribe. But until then, I hope all's well wherever you are, and I look very much to seeing you next week.